A new book takes a new look at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. That's next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Well, the whole world was watching Forest Park in St. Louis in 1904 for the World's Fair, and a new book has some very interesting stories that go along with that. It's Prelude to a Century, the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and we'd like to welcome the author, Patrick Murphy. Hi, Patrick. Welcome back to the show.
Good to see you again.
Everyone watching us right now, I'm guessing, knows that there was a World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. But I think you're going to tell us there's probably a lot about that World's Fair that most people watching don't know.
Yeah, we hear stories from our grandparents, our great-grandparents. St. Louis has got this wonderful obsession with the World's Fair. And some people who aren't from St. Louis wonder, what's the big deal? It was 120 years ago.
But it was a World's Fair.
And it not only was a World's Fair, and this isn't just hype, it was the biggest and the best, most successful World's Fair ever. And, and we did it. St. Louis, we did it.
What's interesting about your book, though, it's not just about what was there. It's a bunch of little facts and stories and details that I don't think the average person has heard. So I'm wondering, what drew you to this, and how hard was it for you to find these stories?
Oh, there were so many great sources. Missouri Historical Society, of course, St. Louis Public Library, they've got these glass plates. Missouri Historical Society, at one point, they said, would you like to see our undigitized material? It's like, yes. And they brought up big cardboard boxes of things that like nobody had seen, maybe since 1904. And so we were able to get a lot of images. Another great source for research is something called newspapers.com, where you type in something and it will actually bring up every reference to any newspaper that talked about it or wrote about it. So you get news as it was happening from the real newspapers. And I find a lot of crazy stories. Like on the Pike one day, there was a cowboy shootout with a bunch of cowboys who were working on the Pike.
The Pike was like the main drag, right?
It was like the amusement area, and just all kinds of crazy stories that you can pick up and do research on. Because what I wanted to do was not just go, this is where they invented the ice cream cone, or they had a big Ferris wheel and all of that, but get into the mentality of the people back in 1904 who actually went there and what they thought and how they perceived it.
I guess you have to be of a certain age to have a personal tie to it. I'm kind of old now.
But you weren't at the fair yourself.
No, I wasn't at the fair. However, I had a grandmother who was in her mid-60s when I was born. She was born in 1891, and she was the youngest of a bunch of kids. So when I was young growing up, every once in a while, she and her older sisters actually went as young girls. And so I actually heard stories, and it made it sort of personal for me.
And my grandfather was born in Cary Patch in 1892, a year after your grandmother. Maybe they knew each other. And he sold newspapers at the fair, this newspaper boy.
You don't remember, you were here, you wrote a book on the Irish in St. Louis, and I think we talked about it on the air. My family on my mother's side was German, and the Irish and German kind of had not a great relationship. They were both out-of-towners, and I think it was sort of a status thing.
Well, my mother's side, my family is German Irish. So at one point they had something to do with each other, I suppose.
Well, my grandmother called them the common Irish.
Shanty. They I mean, the two sides of my family, German and Irish, it wasn't like they didn't like each other. They just didn't understand each other.
I'm going to pick some things out of the book to talk about.
Great.
Before I do that, though, I want to read just this first paragraph out of your book, and I want you to comment on it, what you mean by it, because it's very well written, and I think it probably means a lot. Once upon a time, there are places where time doesn't pass in its usual deliberate way. It pauses, lingers, and leaves pieces of itself scattered here and there. St. Louis is such a place. Ghosts inhabit the neighborhoods, lulling the generations with old songs and stories of who we were and what we might have been. This past is always present and always just beyond our reach. But it wasn't always like that.
Did I write that?
Yes.
That's really good.
What were you leading up to?
that St. Louis has a relationship with the past. It's an old city. A lot of the buildings and the neighborhoods are still here. The past never really goes away. There's always evidence of it in the way we think, in the neighborhoods. Have you ever been in a St. Louis neighborhood, maybe somewhere on the south side, and you look down the street and you think, wow, this could be 1910, except for the cars.
Right.
You know, and there's always even the prejudices we have today and the way we think in St. Louis. The past is just always there, from the immigrants who came to St. Louis and the way we think and do and conduct our business on a daily basis.
And I think another point you bring out at various places in the book too, at that time, like now we're a big city, but we're just one of those big cities. Back then, we were one of the biggest cities.
We were the fourth biggest city in America. And I like to think of the World's Fair as, when people say, how come you St. Louisans are always obsessed on the World's Fair? The answer is very simple. There was a time when we were young and pretty, and everybody wanted to come and visit us. And it would be like a picture of yourself that you keep on the mantle, you know, just to remind yourself.
Have you been to my house?
Sure do have a lot of pictures of yourself around here, Steve. You know, it's a reminder that there was a time when, you know, we were much beloved. You were showing that picture as you were reading it of the, just a minute ago, the slide, and there was a picture of a woman on a stage bowing in front of an audience. I don't know if we can go back and show that, but that was in Puck magazine, which is British, and it was that there she is. That is St. Louis, the woman represented, bowing before the entire world with the lights shining on her. And I kind of get chills when I think about that optimism and pride in our city. Because the whole world participated in the World's Fair, all over Europe and Asia, and they all came to St. Louis.
Well, you've got a million stories in this book about everything. I've chosen just a couple of images, and you can talk about these in specific. Let's take a look at the first one.
That is on the top of Art Hill. That is right in front of the Art Museum today was Festival Hall, whose dome was bigger than that of St. Peter's in Rome. And on either side were what they call the colonnades, is that architecture and statues. So that would be running along the top of Art Hill right now. It's gone, but you can still see, you can imagine at least the footprints of it.
Let's go to the next one.
The Hereafter. That's on the Pike. They had all of these crazy rides that were, they incorporated a lot of theatrical techniques. So you could actually go to heaven or hell in that attraction.
Another chapter you have in your book is Mr. President, David Rowland Francis. Why is he important?
I was prepared not to really like David Francis.
Wasn't he the mayor?
No, he was the governor at one time. He was a very rich businessman. He was the ambassador to Moscow during the Russian Revolution. He was a big deal. And I was kind of prepared not to like him just because I resent authority by nature. And the guy, I found out I really got to like him. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant in coordinating
What
this
did he have
fair.
to do?
He was the president of the fair.
Right.
He put the whole thing together. It was basically his idea. After we lost the fair to Chicago in 1893, Chicago, right? Still, it was going on back then.
We still have a problem with him.
Yeah, even before the cards and the socks, you know. He was, and he put it all together. He wanted to do a better job than Chicago did, and he did.
Wow. Let's look at another image from the book.
That is one of the palaces, and I think it's the Palace of Electricity, on the lagoon, right on one of the lagoons off the Grand Basin, and it kind of gives an idea. They did have colorized images back then. They would like paint them.
I see all these images of these big, massive buildings that look fancy. And
they were acres in size, acres.
How long did it take to get ready for the fair?
About 2 years, which is amazing. First, they had to clear Forest Park because it was a forest, and they had to reroute the river to Pear. Then they built these palaces. Took about a year and a half to 2 years, and that was made out of something called staff, which is paper mache, basically paper mache, and on wood, scaffolding. And
so it wasn't meant to last.
It wasn't meant to last. The only building that really lasted was the art museum.
Art museum. Wow. And they, from a distance, they look just as permanent.
Oh, yeah. They're amazing.
My next question I was going to ask you, Chapter, you just mentioned it, Taming the River de Pere.
Oh.
That was a story I wasn't familiar with as far as the River de Pere having anything to do with the World's Fair.
They put it underground. The River de Pere, 15 miles, it wound through Forest Park, and it was always flooding. It was totally out of control. If they were going to build a fair on top of it, they had to do something, so they built channels and put it underground, and which was just a massive project. And I was over at Missouri Historical Society the other day. Somebody was telling me that one of the channels goes right in front of the Missouri Historical Society, and we see photos of them building it. And in the elevator in the basement of Mohist, and you've been there, on a rainy day, they say you can hear the River de Pere. That little river that runs through the park now, it's totally phony. It's not anything of nature. It's built by the Parks Department.
Well, before the 1904 World's Fair, what was in Forest Park? Come on, the zoo wasn't there. The
it was a forest.
Nothing, the planetarium wasn't there.
The eastern edge had some, around Kings Highway, had some attractions and some, driving carriage routes and things. But the rest of the park was either like the Kennedy Forest now, or just forests with little trails where you could take your carriage. So it wasn't a place really for the middle class or poor people to go.
Huh. Was it kind of like a country road from the park west to Clayton? Was Clayton kind of in the country then?
Oh, Clayton was way in the country. University City didn't even exist. They built University City, basically, which is a whole other story, which is in there, because they knew that 20 million people were going to be coming to there, and it was just kind of a business undertaking. Let's have a city.
Well, what's still in the park? Besides the St. Louis Art Museum, is there anything left from?
Birdcage. Right. After it was over, it was going to go back to the National Zoo, but a number of business leaders said, this is a great birdcage. Right. Let's do something with it.
We need to take a break, Patrick. But we're talking about Patrick's new book on the 1904 World's Fair, and we'll continue right after this on City Corner.
Eyes forward. Don't drive distracted.
There's so many reasons to love St. Louis, you can't pick just one. From the arts, architecture, and culture. An all-new development, including the Cortex Community Center. And you're never too far from great music and entertainment.
So come and experience St. Louis.
My name's Stacy, I'm 57, and I was adopted in 2020. One teen can come in and make you look at life in a whole different way.
You know, he's my father, so I look up to him a lot. If I can be 10% of the man he is, I'll be a happy person for sure.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
Is it okay to call you Mom?
Of course you can.
I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. Reedy Press has a new book out. Patrick Murphy is the author of the book. He's here with us. It's Prelude to a Century, the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, with interesting little tidbits and facts and stories that you may not be familiar with. Patrick, before we get back into the book, I just want to talk just a little bit about you. I've known you for a while. You've been on the show a couple times before, because you've written a couple other books.
We know each other from radio and TV.
Radio, we work next door to one another almost.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Why you never took me to lunch?
I guess I owe you one now, don't I?
Just really quickly, you wrote a book called Candyman. It was about a St. Louis candy manufacturer.
Switzer's licorice.
Right. The Irish in St. Louis. You did a show here with me about that because you have an Irish background. You sort of documented the Irish experience.
Yeah.
And also Places to Pray.
Yeah.
About Catholic churches?
Yeah, I spent a year driving all around the state, photographing and writing about Catholic shrines, churches, cathedrals, little country churches, and that was fun.
And just so people know, we just made reference to it, you were with Channel 9 for decades?
Yeah, as either an independent or staff member.
You produced a lot of things there.
Documentary.
You worked on Living St. Louis. They used to call you The Voice because I guess you did the little breaks.
That's how I started in 1981 doing The Voice. I'd go in 3 days a week and just read a script like Wednesday at 8.
Right,
Well,
and you even got to work on some PBS programs.
Yeah, some of our shows went national. Yeah, we
All right. Well, Prelude to a Century, the St. Louis World's Fair, 1904 World's Fair. Let's take a look at another image from your book.
Okay.
And I know there's a story attached.
Yeah, that's oh wow. The art museum is behind that big building. That's Festival Hall. Inside Festival Hall is the world's largest pipe organ, which was since moved to Philadelphia at the Macy's. The Macy's there, Wanamaker's was back then. That dome, as I think I said in the first segment, was bigger than the dome of St. Peter's. And that's the colonnade on either side. The cascades tumbling down to the Grand Basin, and at night the lights. It was black and white photography, so when we see the photographs, they look like they're just like white lights, but they were actually colored lights. So it must have just been amazing.
And this was something people had not seen anywhere else. This was new technology.
They call that the main picture, the architects and designers.
And speaking of buildings, right now in Forest Park, there's a very old structure called the World's Fair Pavilion.
Yeah.
But
it wasn't really from the World's Fair. They actually had money left over after the fair, and they wanted to repay the city, for their generosity. And around 1913, they built the World's Fair Pavilion, which many of us remember. Remember the rock concerts at the Hippie Hill.
Well, I mean, I've read about them.
Yeah, I read about it. And it's called the World's Fair Pavilion, but it wasn't actually there. Actually, the Missouri building was there. It was another grand palace, one of these gigantic palaces.
Let's take a look at another image from the book.
Oh yeah, the Pike. That was when you had enough culture and you spent enough time surveying the progress of humanity. You went to the Pike where you could dance the hoochie coochie and go on incredible rides. And Hagenbeck's zoo was there. Hagenbeck was the leading zoo guy of that period of time.
You have a chapter in your book called "The Problem with the Water."
Oh boy, that was.
And that's not the water from the river to Pear.
Somebody said, no, this is the water. If you lived in St. Louis before 1904 and you turned on your tap, mud would come out. And Missourians, they were going to drink it. St. Louisans, they'd let it sit until it settled and then drink it. Well, you can't have cascades tumbling down Art Hill of brown water, spewing mud all over. So they had to find some way to clean up the water supply, which came from Chain of Rocks. And they tried all kinds of different things. Finally, your audience is all interested in the chemistry of it. But finally, they thought they came up with a solution. They let the water come. It took a few days to get from Chain of Rocks to St. Louis. And like a week before the fair started, clean water, to the great relief of everybody.
Yeah, people are still complaining about the quality of water now, though, aren't they?
I like St. Louis water.
All right. Let's look at another image.
Okay.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's a photo taken by Jessie Tarbox Fields. And she actually that's on the Philippine reservation. And one of the criticisms, rightly so, of the fair was that it was not kind in the way it displayed indigenous people. In fact, it was quite condescending and racist.
Right.
And she turned it around and tried to show the humanity, the humor, the similarities between indigenous people and us. She came at her photography with a sense of humanity and compassion and empathy that a lot of people didn't, who regarded, one of the big attractions was, come and see the barbarians, come and see the dog-eating savages.
Because back then you wouldn't have seen movies and photos of them like we do now. It was all kind of new. It was something maybe people heard of, but they'd never seen a person from there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're much more, we still got problems, but we're much more aware than we are.
Right.
God, I mean, my grandfather would have been upset marrying a German or a Protestant.
I told you what my grandmother said about the Irish.
Much less somebody from the Philippines, I mean, so I hope that we've come a long way, but that was her way of creating an image to open people's minds a bit. There were some great female photographers who, in fact, I think that the best photography of the fair came from a handful of women photographers.
Really?
Yeah, the Gerhard sisters, Jessie Tarbox Fields. Google them. They're worth looking at. Or no, buy the book.
Right, buy the book. I'm going to ask you how to do that here in just a minute.
Okay.
Let's look at another image from the book.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty well-known image. It was done before 1904 when they were still fooling around with where some of the palaces and streets would go. So it's not an exact representation of the fair, but it's pretty close. And the fact that it isn't is interesting in itself. But that's the main picture looking towards Art Hill. That's Art Hill at the top, and the palaces that are kind of spread out fan-like on either side. But that's still only a very small part of the overall fair. It was huge, 1,600 acres.
Yeah, do you remember what the attendance was?
20 million.
Can you answer this? It seems like traveling in 1904 would be a little more complicated than it is today. So did people come from, it would have been an incredible journey for people to have come from far away.
It was, but they had a better train system back then. And a lot of the trains were advertising, hey, it's the World's Fair Express.
Really?
Come from Baltimore or Spokane or whatever. And they tried to, and the fair tried to promote that too. I mean, this was a massive PR effort. So they worked with the railroads and other cities to be able to try to encourage people to come.
What do you know about the effects post 1904 World's Fair? Did it just send St. Louis spinning in success for a while, or what were the after effects?
I think so. It certainly put St. Louis on the map. We didn't remain the fourth biggest city for long. I mean, that was kind of the height of it. It was probably really the peak of St. Louis's glory days. But it went on for a long, long time to be even a bigger and more successful city. And we have our challenges now. I'm optimistic. If we could do this once, we've got the spirit to be able to bring our city back. I like to think that.
Has no one ever tried to do it?
It's a different world. It was just a different world. And even World's Fairs, people aren't doing World's Fairs anymore. Yeah. What was the last big World's Fair? 1964, maybe?
Beat the New York World's Fair. I went.
You did?
Yeah.
Well, let me interview you about the 64 World's Fair.
I remember it. Well, we were living in Middletown, New Jersey, so my mom took me. It was only like an hour away.
Well, when you fly into LaGuardia, you still see
we drove.
Yeah, you still see the big globe.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but ours was better. St. Louis was better.
That's what my mom told me.
Yeah.
Let's look at another image from Prelude to a Century. Yes, you have a chapter on cameras, because this was sort of a up-and-coming thing.
Yeah, they had a Kodak, but it was the first time really around 1901, 1902 that Kodak came out with the Brownie camera. It cost like $1, which would be like $30 now, But people were bringing, there was even some debate as to whether they should charge people extra if they were bringing a camera. And then they relaxed that because the Missouri Photography Club protested. But it's probably, because of that, the most photographed event of its time up until then. One guy came up with, this is funny, and it's in the book, it's a squirting camera. It's like, they came up with this, it's like a gag camera, playing off this popularity of photography. It's like, ha-ha, pose, smile, cheese, ha, you got squirted, some gag, huh?
Hey, this book is just out by Reedy Press. I know you've been doing a lot of interviews and things about it, and book signings and stuff like that.
And by the way, thank you for giving me more than 3 minutes. And I'm grateful for any television station out there that gives me 30 seconds.
Well, when you go on the local TV shows, you just get a couple of minutes, right?
A couple of minutes. But to be able to sit and talk about this for a half an hour is a real pleasure. And that's what you do so well. I really appreciate you and your show.
We love doing it, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, it shows.
Well, what's the best way? Now, you've got your own website. What's the best way to get the book? What would you recommend?
It should be everywhere. It better be. Like bookstores, the big chains, local bookstores like Webster Books or Cary Cottage. Straub's and Schnucks have done a wonderful job in promoting and selling the book. Reedy, their website, or you can go to patrickmurphyauthor.com, spelled just the way it sounds, and we will mail you one, patrickmurphyauthor.com. So it should be, I hope it's just everywhere. You're not going to be able to avoid this book for a while, I hope.
Okay, let's look at one more image and just make this really quick, a positive ending note on this one.
Okay.
I have to know, is the wheel buried in Forest Park? I've heard all these stories. What's true?
There is a very strong popular myth that axle, which you see up in the upper right, is buried somewhere in Forest Park. This myth torments St. Louisans. I, beyond any doubt in my mind, know what happened to that axle, and there's a chapter in the book about that.
Well, I haven't read it yet.
I'm not going to tell you either, because you got to get the book to know where the axle is.
You got any plans for books in the future?
Yeah, but I'm not. I've got a couple of. I haven't decided quite yet.
Historically related, or?
Yes, and I'm also fooling around with a novel.
No kidding.
Yeah, because I want to be on your show again.
Do you write quickly?
Yeah, pretty quick, yeah.
If you were going to write a novel, what
the only time I see is when I write a book. So, I got to write another book to get together with you?
All right, Patrick Murphy, I'm going to end this show now so you can go home and start. It's Prelude to a Century, the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, written by our guest, Patrick Murphy. Go to his website, patrickmurphyauthor.com, or to reedypress.com, or anywhere. Find it. It's at Schnucks and all sorts of places.
And Straub's.
Patrick, thank you so much for being back here. And
always fun. Always fun.
I will look forward to seeing you when your next book comes out.
Thank you.
All right. The 1904 World's Fair. It's amazing. I'm Steve Potter. Thanks for watching City Corner. See you next time. Bye.